Chapter 1. A Long Cold Winter. During the winter of 1410 to 1411, 12-year-old Johann Gutenberg grew restless. He couldn't play outside while snowstorms swirled around his house. He couldn't walk around the forest at the edge of town with snow piled high against the trees. Sometimes he couldn't go to school with his friends when icy winds froze everything in their path. Fortunately, there were books in his home, and Johann knew how to read. After he read all of his father's books, he borrowed others from his parents' friends. The nearby monastery also had books he could read, although the most precious ones were chained to reading tables. Not that Johann would have wanted to take the monastery's books home to read, but most books in the 1400s were about religion, philosophy, law, and other similar topics. 600 years ago, there were no books written for children, but good stories could be found in books. When Johann's older brother, Frele, was too busy to play chess or backgammon, and his sister Else was doing needlework, he could find good company in the history books and the chronicles in his father's library. Chronicles told of important events in years past and spoke of famous people and the great things they had done. After Johann was much older, chroniclers wrote about the winter of 1410 to 1411 and the town of Mainz. Johann, his brother, sister, father, and mother lived in Mainz, where they were born. Nowadays, Mainz is a city in Germany. In the 1400s, Mainz was part of the Holy Roman Empire, which included small kingdoms and towns stretching from Germany to northern Italy. Mainz was an important trading town on the Rhine River. Traders came up the river from all parts of Europe and beyond. Johann's parents bought expensive things such as glass from Italy, spices from China, and beautiful books from Germany and beyond. The books were called manuscripts from a Latin word meaning written by hand. All books were copied down with pen and ink, letter by letter. Manuscript books sometimes took a long time to make and could be very expensive. 600 years ago, a luxury book might be worth as much as a good-sized farm. Besides buying books from traders, Johann's father paid local copyists called scribes to copy texts by hand. When the text was finished, the scribe handed the buyer a set of loose sheets covered with neat handwriting. The loose pages were made of calf, sheep, or goat skins called parchment or vellum. The skins had been soaked, stretched, and scraped until they were smooth enough to write on. Before the sheets of parchment became a book, many more craftspeople did their work. Johann, anxious to read every new book his father ordered, followed each step. The loose sheets first went to the rubricator, or red inker. The rubricator wrote chapter titles and section headings in red to make them stand out from the black letters of the text. Sometimes the rubricator also put a red line through the first letter of each sentence. Parchment was so expensive that none of it could be wasted. If any space was left at the bottom of the page, a new chapter started right after the one before. Since every inch of space was used, the rubricator's work helped readers find their place on the page. Next, Johann's father might give the pages to an artist called an illuminator. Illuminators decorated the margins with miniature scenes, geometric designs, or borders of leaves and flowers. For more expensive books, illuminators painted brightly colored pictures or giant letters at the beginning of each chapter. On the most precious books, thin sheets of gold leaf were applied to make the pages shine. The binder sewed the loose sheets of parchment together and bound them between wooden boards. At the bindery, workers also covered the boards with cloth, leather, or perhaps even gold, silver, and carved ivory. For fancier leather covers, the title of the book was stamped on, one letter at a time, with brass punches. Johann grew impatient waiting for books to be finished. He wished for a faster way to make them. A scribe spent weeks copying a book. Then, by the time the rubricator, illuminator, and binder did their jobs, several months might pass. There must be a better way, Johann thought, and some day he would figure it out. In the meantime, he had other things, like school, to think about. Johann's father saw to it that he and his brother received a good education. At that time, boys like Johann went to schools run by the Catholic Church. In school, priests taught them their most important subject, Latin. During school hours, students and teachers read and spoke only in Latin. It wasn't easy to study grammar, geography, or arithmetic in foreign language. At school, Johann used the name Gutenberg even though his brother and the rest of his family were called Geinsfleisch. The Geinsfleisch family was a large one, and several men in Mainz were named Johann Geinsfleisch. Johann may have preferred being called Gutenberg or Good Hill to Geinsfleisch, which means gooseflesh. Johann took his name from Hof zum Gutenberg, one of the 3 mansions his family owned. Hof in German means court. Large medieval houses like Hofzoom Gutenberg were often U-shaped with an inner court. The rooms around the courtyard had doors and glass windows to let in light and air. On stormy winter days when he couldn't go outside, Johann read beside the windows. They gave better light than the flickering wax candles he lit at night. Most houses in Mainz did not have glass windows or wax candles for lighting. They were dark and smoky places. In the daytime, some light came in through narrow windows covered with oiled cloth. But at night, and during cold weather, wooden shutters closed out any natural light. Since candles were expensive, the glowing fire in the fireplace was often the only source of light. People cooked meals in the fireplace, and smoke drifted around the room. Sometimes it was hard to breathe, and the walls became covered with black soot. Hof zum Gutenberg did have one thing in common with other houses in Mainz: no indoor plumbing. This meant no bathroom was inside. Johann and his family used an outhouse in the backyard. In colder weather and at night, they used indoor pots which had to be emptied often. There may have been a steam room in the basement of the Hof zum Gutenberg for bathing. If not, Johann would have gone to a public or private bathhouse, as everyone else did in Mainz. On his way to the bathhouse or to school, Johann walked down narrow, twisting streets. Rows of houses lined the streets, and many had shops on the ground floor. The buildings were narrow and tall, sometimes 3 and 4 stories high. To gain more living space, each story stuck out a little beyond the one below. Upper floors jutted over the street, and houses opposite each other almost met above Johann's head. All through the winter of 1410 to 1411, snow piled up on the high-pitched roofs and then crashed down to the streets below. Even with the snow and cold weather, Johann could smell the garbage tossed into the gutters. Pigs and chickens running loose through Mainz ate some of the litter, but there were always piles waiting to be cleaned up. If he was unlucky, Johann stepped in a pile when he wasn't looking. And on very unlucky days, he might even get a shower from dirty water thrown out of an upstairs window. Johann passed by many of the shops lining the streets of Mainz. These shops were run by guilds. In the 1400s in Europe, there were craft guilds and merchant guilds. Men and women who made things to sell were members of the craft guilds. These included jewelers' guilds, weavers' guilds, carpenter guilds, and many others. Many of the more successful townspeople belonged to merchant guilds. They handled the town's trade. Merchant guilds also supplied craft guilds with the raw materials they needed. Jewelers, for example, bought gold through merchant guilds, and weavers bought dyes. The men in Johann's family were not guild members. They had inherited money and property and did not need to work. However, many of them did work, especially in the town's government. Johann and his family were members of a group of high-ranking families known as patricians. They had lived in Mainz for many years and were very powerful. The patrician families operated the mint, which made the town's money. The mint was also in charge of collecting taxes to run the town's government. Collecting taxes was not popular. During the winter of 1410 to 1411, patricians were becoming very unpopular with the guilds of Mainz. Johann's father was one of the patrician members of the Mainz town council. Guild members could be on the council too, but there were always more than enough patricians to give them control of Mainz. People in the guilds wanted more of their members on the council. They had been angry for a long time about high taxes the council put on beer, wine, and grain. In early 1411, times were bad for many Mainz citizens. Most people had not earned enough money to keep their families fed and warm during the long, cold winter. That spring, the council voted to raise taxes. Guild members were angrier than ever before. Their families were hungry, and the government wanted even more money from them. The guilds had had enough. They stormed into the town hall, threw out the patricians, and took over the Mainz town council. Johann's father was horrified. Mainz would be ruined. Guilds had no experience in government. Many members could barely read and write. The patricians, including Johann's father, lost their jobs at the mint. To make matters worse, they were insulted as they walked down the street. Guild members jeered at Johann too, even though he was only 13. By late spring of 1411, Johann's father was fed up with life in Mainz. He moved the family to Eltville, 7.5 miles away, where they owned a home in the country.